So in this video, we're going to be looking at doing a regression, and one of the independent variables that we're going to be using is going to require multiple dummy variables in its place. So that's a real point of difference here. So data was obtained for the price, volume, freezer location, and energy cost for popular fridges sold in Australia, and you can download the data in this file here. So the first part of the question is to construct dummy variables for freezer location. So if we jump over to the actual spreadsheet, what we can see here is that there's multiple different options for freezer location. So it could be a top freezer, a side-by-side freezer, or if we scroll down as well, bottom freezer. So since this is like categorical data, we're going to need to turn it into numerical values if we're to use it in a regression equation. So the key point here is that we have three different possible values for it, which means we are going to need one less than that dummy variables. So 3 minus 1 is 2. So what I'm going to do is create two new variables. The first one I'm going to call freezer location, and I'm going to give a 1 to, let's say, top freezer. Okay, so anytime that one is answered, this column is going to have a 1. If it's anything else, it's going to be a 0. The second one I'm going to make is we're going to give a 1 to, say, the side-by-side. Okay, so in this column, anytime that there is a side-by-side response, i.e. like here, it's going to get a 1. Anything else is going to get a 0. So what that means is that basically the last category, which was the bottom freezer down here, it's going to become the reference category. So it's going to be a 0 in both of these columns. So let me just highlight this and wrap it so we can actually see what we got. Make it happen. So here I'm going to do it as an if command, but you could just type in 1s and 0s if you wanted to. So if this is equal to top freezer, I'm going to give it a 1, and if it's anything else, it's going to get a 0. So hit enter, and I should be able to copy this down by just clicking on there. And you can see that side-by-sides are getting 0s and bottoms are getting 0s. So that's good. So here, same thing. If this is equal to, I'll go with side-by-side, then I want it to be a 1 this time. And anything else, it's going to be a 0. So copy that all down in terms of my formula. So again, 0s for top freezer, which is good, 1s for side, and 0 for bottom, which is what we were looking for. So what we've done here is basically converted our categorical data into numerical data in these two columns, which can now be used in our regression equation. Alright, so jumping back to our question, we've done part A. Part B now is to regress fridge price, so that's going to be our dependent variable. And we're going to use volume, freezer location, and energy cost as the independent variables, or the ones that are going to then predict fridge price. So going back to Excel, in order to do this using the Excel tools, what we just need to make sure is that all of our independent variables, so we're using volume, energy cost, and then these two for freezer location, they all just need to be in consecutive columns. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm just going to cut this and paste it on the other side. That's just so Excel doesn't throw you an error. So in order to do it, what we need to go into is data and then data analysis. And then we need to pick out the regression option, which is down the bottom here. Click OK. So our input Y range, this is our dependent variable, the thing we're trying to predict. And in our case, that's the price of the fridge. So what we want to do is go over here and select all of this as our input. Cool. Alright, so now the X range here, this is going to be all the independent variables that we are using to predict the price. So we had volume, energy cost, and freezer location, which we're using our dummy variables to represent. So we want to select, just click and drag, all of this stuff here. Alright, we want to tick labels because we had column labels at the top in the first row. Output range, So let's say that we stick it out here. Everything else should be as required. So just click OK, and we get the output of our regression model. So the main thing that we're interested in are these kind of coefficients, because they're going to be what is inputted into our equation. Okay. Alright, so let me just make this a bit wider so we can see. Alright, so I'm just going to type our answer here. So the format of it is y equals, our dependent variable equals, and then it's going to be b0, which is the coefficient of our intercept, plus, then we take the coefficient of our first independent variable and multiply it by that variable. So in our case, I'll just write it as x1 here, but in our case it's going to end up being volume as our first variable. So then b2, that's the coefficient of our second one, and that gets times by x2, which is the actual variable. And we keep doing that for as many independent variables as we have. So let's fill this in. So our dependent variable, the thing we're trying to predict, is the price of the fridge. So it's going to be equal to the intercept value, which is, let me round it, so about 923, plus this one here, b1, that's the coefficient for our first independent variable. So it's 5.25 approximately here, and that gets multiplied by the actual volume of the fridge in litres. Next up we have the energy cost. So its coefficient is negative, so minus 38. We'll round it to 34, multiplied by the actual energy cost in, we can see there it's in dollars per quarter. Right, next up we have our freezer location. So minus 51, we'll round it to 518. And it gets times by, I'll write this FL for freezer location, and we'll put in brackets here, I won't, I'll just put 1T for one, means top freezer, okay? Next up we have our side by side, so this one is positive, and it's 345 approximately, times, let's just abbreviate this, so freezer location, and this time it's a 1 for side by side, everything else is 0. So that there becomes our regression equation, and the answer to, I think this is part B of our solution. Alright, so jumping back again, the next thing that we have to do is comment on the strength of the regression model. So we can get this from Excel. What we're going to be interested in is like these R-squared values. So R-square on its own, that's kind of the raw output. The adjusted R-square accounts for how many independent variables you have. So this is kind of the more accurate, accepted one, I suppose. So what it's saying is about 52%, or around that too, of the output variable, in our case price, can be explained by our inputs here. So volume, energy cost, and freezer location. So this isn't the greatest fit. 1 would be a perfect fit. So we're well off that. Kind of makes sense. There's probably a few other factors that would contribute to the price of the fridge. One that comes to mind would be the brand of it. Some brands would be known as expensive and some would be known as cheaper. So if we were to perhaps add in a few more independent variables, we might be able to get this better, but on its own it isn't too bad. I mean, it's about 50% of our variation can be explained by what we've already got in the model. So that would be my comment on that part. So the next part, D, is what is the predicted price of a side-by-side fridge where we've got a volume of 330 litres and a cost of $50. So I guess the other point to highlight I should have done was side-by-side fridge. So now all we have to do is go back and use our regression equation in order to calculate it. So let me mark in here. So we have side-by-side. The volume was equal to, I'll pop it here, 350 litres, and the energy cost was, grab that, $50. Cool. Alright, so we're going to use this equation for price, and I might as well calculate it in Excel. So it's going to be equals, and what we started with was our coefficient here for the intercept, plus we did the 25, it needed to be multiplied by the volume of the fridge. So that's going to be 350. Next we have our energy cost coefficient. So it's going to be plus, and then the negative comes in here with the coefficient itself. This gets multiplied by our energy cost, which we've got as 50, plus. So the next one we've got is this coefficient of negative 518 approximately, and it gets multiplied by 1 if it's a top freezer, or 0 if it's anything else. So ours isn't anything else because it's a side by side. So it's going to get multiplied by 0 and not contribute to our equation. And then the last one is this 345, which gets multiplied by a 1 if it's a side by side. And that is exactly what we have. So we pop in a 1 here. And this is our predicted price. So $1,189 is what we would expect to pay for this type of fridge. So that's all there is for this video, and I'll see you in another one.